Hello guys, welcome to another video. Now in this one I'm going to do my first impressions for patch 3.24 as I've been playing for a little bit over the weekend, so I can kind of get a grasp on some of the changes at this point. And let's get straight into it with the changes to the campaign. That's the addition of some of the league mechanics to the campaign. I absolutely love this. Things like the Dweller of the Deep being an essence mob now. There's like a Legion pylon spawning in one of the early Act 1 zones. There was a Corruption Temple in the Vow Ruins, I think, in Act 2. And Ritual Altars there in Act 2 as well. I love these changes a lot. And I think for the most part, these changes are not really going to impact people who push fast through the campaign. But they're going to provide a little bit of extra assistance to people who are a little bit slower or perhaps a little bit new to the game. Things like the guaranteed essence dropping from the Dweller of the Deep. And being able to do Ritual in Act 2 to get potentially an upgrade from that vendor window. Really, really nice additions. I love those changes. So I hope they do more of those and add more of those features to the campaign going forward. Little additions here and there, I think, in each patch will provide a nicer experience to that first campaign playthrough and subsequent campaign playthroughs as well. And next up, we've got the quality of life features. I can't really speak too much on this because I don't think I've really experienced that much of the quality of life stuff just yet. I haven't been using the hotkey for portal scrolls too much because that's something that I'm going to have to get used to over time. And one thing that I did experience in the campaign, of course, which most people would have experienced, is the removal of left-click instant skills. That would have been a steel skin early on and then a molten shell or something like that. But that's not the case, so that was gone, and that's a little bit unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. For the other quality of life, I'm looking forward to spamming fusings and things like that. That's definitely a feature that I'm excited about. But overall, can't speak too much on the quality of life changes. So let's move on to the big contentious topic at the moment. That's the Necropolis League mechanic. And, well, what can I say about this one? Necropolis is, in my opinion, a pretty big step down from Affliction. It just doesn't feel like a great League mechanic to begin with. And I hope they're going to ship a lot of big changes to this in the next couple of weeks. Because there are a lot of things wrong with Necropolis. So let's first start off with the UI, which I think is probably the #1 biggest problem with it. And this is not just the UI in the maps when you're collecting corpses, it's the UI actually in the Necropolis zone itself. When you're in maps and you're trying to collect a corpse, there's this big window that comes up. It gives you all of the information on the corpse, what modifier it's providing to you, things like that. Then you have to click to collect that corpse. But there's some problems with this. First of all, the window itself obscures everything underneath it. If there's any items that are underneath it that you're trying to pick up, you can't pick those up. If there are any things going on underneath that window, like for example a detonate dead, things like that, that's just going to kill you if you're standing on top of it and you can't actually see it. With a bit of luck, you'll be able to hear it now because the detonate dead changes have made hearing detonate dead a lot easier. But this is still something that shouldn't be in the game, in my opinion, a giant window that just blocks a bunch of the screen. So they need a better way to showcase that. Probably a more simplified thing would be a lot easier, maybe even just an icon to show what type of mod it is. But at the moment, that's not a fantastic thing. And the UI problems don't end there, because over in the Necropolis zone itself, the UI for actually creating items and putting together a big crafting recipe is a bit of a disaster. Putting corpses in the ground is a problem, I think. It really could do with some kind of list of corpses that you can then just drag and drop into the graves or something like that, because that would be so much easier to do and so much faster, and it would feel a lot better actually crafting items. It wouldn't feel like you're spending a bunch of time trying to get the arrangement of corpses correct. You can kind of plan it out in your head and then you can just drag and drop all of these corpses into the graves. I think that would be way better. And I have to say, maybe this is just me, but the Necropolis League mechanic feels incredibly underbaked. Like, it feels weird to be in there crafting items and there be no monsters to kill. Like, it just feels very strange not killing monsters as part of the crafting mechanic. I'm not sure if that's just me, maybe you feel like that as well, but it almost feels like Harvest, but without the monsters. So that's a little bit strange for me. I think another feature that should be in the game that I've seen a lot of people asking for is a way to sort corpses, just be able to immediately pick out a specific corpse. Some sort of like Control F feature where you can just immediately highlight a specific corpse. We definitely need something like that. But yeah, the UI in Necropolis needs a lot of help. and I think the crafting system itself probably needs help. I can't really speak for the power level of the mechanic. I should think that it's very strong. Not saying that the mechanic is bad. I think that the likelihood of it being able to craft incredible items is very high, but the UI and interaction with the mechanic needs to be improved. And then there's the other part of Necropolis, that's the lantern mechanic with maps and other zones. Well, this mechanic feels a little bit strange as well, because it's like a forced difficulty, and a lot of the difficulty is completely overtuned in my opinion. Some of these monster modifiers are totally ridiculous. Things that come to mind immediately are the physical damage as extra elemental, which also have an elemental penetration modifier attached to them. The overwhelm physical is ridiculous as well. Not to mention the modifiers which make monsters deal more damage for each existing pack member. That thing is crazy as well. And I believe this was one of the reasons why Crip has quit the league in day one, is because he plays Ruthless, and I know that many people will not be able to relate to Ruthless, but obviously this mechanic is going to feel terrible in Ruthless, a game mode where you already don't have very good gear, you're already struggling through progression, and this forced difficulty on top is not going to feel great, especially when it's not very rewarding. The rewards of this mechanic, the devoted modifiers, that's the things that are supposed to be like the gold text that give you special loot, and replace loot drops with other types of loot. These modifiers just don't feel great. They don't feel very rewarding at all, especially not at the cost of the detrimental modifiers. And I think this part of the mechanic needs help as well. And what I'd like to see here is a way to actually gamble with modifiers. So perhaps when you enter a zone, you get the lantern show up, and you should be able to gamble a particular modifier away. For example, if you have no problem with the detrimental modifiers, but let's say you have 1 or 2 gold modifiers on there which are granting you rewards, but you're not a big fan of them. Let's say one of them converts monsters' armor drops into alterations, and you don't need any alterations. So instead, what you should be able to do is gamble that modifier and change it into a new gold modifier, which might be better or it could be worse, but at least you get the option to actually change a modifier around. And you could instead use that gamble option on one of the detrimental modifiers. Let's say you're playing a Juggernaut and there's 50% Fizz Overwhelm, which by the way shouldn't be a thing, but it is. So you can actually choose to gamble that modifier away and you'll get a new modifier replacing it. And I think that would be a really nice option. If not, just make it so that you're able to straight up veto a modifier off of the map. So if there's a modifier which isn't great, allow players the option to be able to just remove one modifier from their map, each map. And I think that would be a good improvement as well. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of the lantern mechanic because I think the rewards are nowhere near as good as they should be for the amount of difficulty that is imposed on every map. Next up, we have the end game with the removal of things like sextants and some other parts there, and replaced with the whole new reworked Scarab system. And so far, my gameplay with the Scarabs, which is fairly limited, has been a positive one. I think the new Scarabs are good. I really enjoy the uniqueness of the Scarabs. They're not boring anymore. They are unique and interesting, and when you actually want to add specific Scarabs to your maps, you really feel the impact of those Scarabs because they're so unique and the modifiers that they provide are very unique. And adds a bit of a different feel to the way maps are played, and overall just makes them feel more impactful. So I'm a big fan so far of the Scarab changes. And speaking of the end game, we also had a lot of changes to the Atlas passive tree. So far, I'm about 40 or 45% through my Atlas completion, and I have a tree setup which basically guarantees that Betrayal is spawning in every map, and that is really nice for being able to constantly farm Katarina. So that's a really nice thing that I like about the new tree, being able to kind of full spec into a mechanic and have it guaranteed spawn every time. That's not a thing I think for every mechanic. For example, the heist caches, the chance for those to spawn actually didn't get improved this patch. Whereas some other things like the chance to spawn harvest, that did get improved. There's one weird at the bottom of the tree that grants 70% on its own, which is additive with the 8% base spawn. So immediately just with one wheel, you already have 78%. So that's really nice there as well. Same thing with Expedition. You can basically just full spec into it and pretty much have it spawn every single map. So I'm a fan of those changes, and I can't really speak about things like tier 17 maps yet because I haven't got even remotely close to those just yet. I think most players probably haven't even touched any content like that just yet. So we'll have to wait and see with that. From what I've seen of that on Reddit and things like that, the maps might be a little bit overtuned. I think the modifiers are probably a little bit ridiculous because you can't modify them at all. You can't change those maps. And those modifiers applying on top of the bosses is going to create a little bit of a problem there, I think, where the maps end up feeling a little bit like Valdo's maps, in that there are some maps that your character simply cannot run because the modifiers are too strong, you can't change them. And when you gate specific content like Ubers behind these types of maps, there is a bit of a problem there with things like Solo Self-Found, because now these maps, depending on how rare they are to spawn, there's now a problem with these maps, because if you're dropping them very rarely, and the ones that you do drop, you can't do them because your character is just basically completely shut out by one particular mod. And I think that's a bit of a problem, because, you know, Valdo's maps are one thing, they're a full opt-in feature, and you know what reward you're going to be getting, you know all of the mods, you know the problems that you're going to face going into that map. But with the tier 17 maps, they're actually gating specific content behind those that we previously had full access to just from the Atlas tree. So I think it's a bit of a problem if those maps are basically completely unrunnable by certain characters. So they might have to address that, but I haven't actually got to the tier 17 maps, so I can't really speak from personal experience with those things just yet. But that's going to be it for my first impressions. I think Necropolis has a long way to go. I hope they're going to ship a lot of updates for this league in the coming days and weeks. But what about you guys? What do you think of patch 3.24? Let me know how you're getting on in the comment section below. And big shout out to my channel supporters over on Patreon. Thank you very much for your support. If you'd like to join them and support this channel going forward, you can head over to the Patreon that I've set up. All of the information is there. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.